Imagine the ROI of investing 8 weeks into your own personal and professional growth. Head to renegadeaccelerator.com. Enrollment is open for our fall program. This opportunity is for female leaders, executives, founders who are looking to 10x the way they think and execute. The program is equal parts education, collaboration, and accountability. It's all virtual, but it's live, interactive, real-time learning. And the curriculum includes everything from building your personal brand online to public speaking, podcasting, publishing, productizing your intellectual property, and even marketing partnerships. We also focus on wealth creation. My goal is to help you create a healthier relationship with both time and money. Head to renegadeaccelerator.com and you will find a video of Renegade grads who explain their experience, share what they've learned, and share their actual results. All of the information is on renegadeaccelerator.com. Here we go. Renegade Accelerator fall enrollment is open. We are in the early decision deadline period. So that means you can save money on tuition. We do have limited seats, and there has been a wait list. So head to renegadeaccelerator.com and fill out the application if you're interested. And if you're not sure, just sign up for our emails. We will take you through a process that helps you determine whether or not the program is the right fit for you. The constant feedback I'm hearing from Renegade grads is that they join the program for the curriculum, for the education, for the mindset shift, for the tangible, tactical results. However, they don't realize what they're also getting is a lifelong community that is a mosaic of like-minded, like-hearted women who just continue to accelerate each other way beyond the program. And that is because when you graduate from the Renegade Accelerator, you're invited into the Renegade Collective. This is our alumni network, and we have ongoing programming. We have the ability to connect on a daily basis, network, help each other, and it's pure magic. So if this sounds interesting to you, head to renegadeaccelerator.com, and you can always reach out to me as well if you have questions. I'm at Amy Jo Martin on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, you name it. Head to renegadeaccelerator.com.
You always want to be like your best self when you're meeting people for the first time. But in the infertility community, it's like, let me show you my worst self and like, you're still going to love me for it. And that's what I think is so amazing.
I'm Amy Jo Martin. Welcome to the Why Not Now show. You know that thing you've been thinking about doing? Yeah, that one. Why not now? Have you ever actually taken the time to ask yourself, what's stopping me? Let's talk it through. This is your chance to give that idea the attention it deserves and take action. Each episode, I have a chat with a fascinating person, from entrepreneurs to athletes, celebrities, my parents, rocket scientists, and all walks of life. We talk through a critical time when they've asked themselves, why not now? We dissect that day or even that moment, step by step. Just let go. Today, we have Samantha Busch on the podcast. Samantha is a wife, mother, author, entrepreneur. She is the co-owner of a professional race team. Yes, she is married to NASCAR's Kyle Busch, also known as Rowdy Busch. However, our discussion today really doesn't dive into NASCAR too much, which my father will be disappointed in, but sorry, Dad, we had other things to talk about. We do touch on it for a moment, though. A little more about Samantha. Samantha studied at Purdue. She majored in psychology. She went on to get her master's in industrial organizational psychology. She is the author of Fighting Infertility, You may have seen her on the Today Show, on the cover of People magazine, on social media, talking about the topic of infertility. She has become a hub for the conversation. She has become a touch point for doctors and patients, families. Anyone that touches this topic tends to know about Samantha because she and Kyle Busch have been so public about their journey. They even started a foundation called Bundle of Joy Fund. They have put 40 families through IVF financially, and they now have a family of 40 babies that have been born. You can actually go see these little ones at bundleofjoyfund.org. Samantha does have one son, Brexton, and it was quite the journey to get to that point. She's now on an even more intense quest to have a second child. Her stories, her situation, the scenarios that she's been through are unmatched. It's unbelievable what she and her family have been through. And I know it's not uncommon. Samantha and I talk through the innovation around fertility, the demand, the craving, the need for innovation. She is committed and she is passionate about driving that. So am I. It's incredible that we can send billionaires to space and back in 15 minutes, but we are still lacking so much research around fertility. So much innovation has yet to be done. And that's why I've invested in, and I'm on the board of a new company that's focused just on this, how to wrap around machine learning and artificial intelligence into the fertility journey at each stage, not just IVF, but every single stage. We are on a mission to increase accuracy and effectiveness, bring the costs down, and empower everyone involved. The power of connecting and the power of just having these conversations leads to collaboration. So since this conversation, I've actually been able to expose Samantha to what we're doing with the company I'm involved in, which you will hear a lot more about soon. And she's excited to help and contribute as well. One of the things I appreciate so much about Samantha is that she has humanized this process, this journey, and she has opened up communication and created an environment online, especially where women and families and partners feel okay to talk about this. The only way we are going to push innovation forward in the world of fertility is by talking about it, by humanizing the data and wrapping stories, human stories around all of these data points. That's exactly what Samantha's doing, and it is her quest. As you listen to Samantha talk, you will realize she should have an honorary MD, like IVF fertility doctor MD degree, just because of how much she knows. She's taken the situation into her own hands to do what she can to learn, to research, to reach out to the experts, bring them together, and see what can be done by putting all these different pieces together. There's still so much that's unknown. And then you add other dynamics, like the fact that people are waiting longer and longer to have children. As someone who waited until almost 40 to have her first child, I know firsthand that there's a narrative out there. You've got time, you've got time. So the demand for help with getting pregnant, for fertility treatments, for navigating this road is becoming stronger and stronger. I always take notes when I'm interviewing and listening to guests. And as I look at my notes here, I've got plenty. But I circled and underlined 3 words, and that is strong ass woman. So without further ado, here is Samantha Busch. Samantha Busch, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me. And in the spirit of why not now, let's hop right in. Can you tell me about a time when you had a big decision to make and you had to ask yourself, why not now? We'll dissect that minute, day, hour, season, and kind of understand how you crossed that delta from idea to action.
I really think it came for writing my book, Fighting Infertility. So for many years, I had journaled as a form of therapy. I had a blog. I talked about our infertility story on social media. And I always told myself, well, you're not a professional author. You can't write a book, or nobody's going to want to read it. All these different things. And true story, Harlan Coben is my very favorite author. He writes like murder mysteries. I'm sure listeners out there have heard of him. And so I was interviewed one time and I had a Q&A and I said, who's your favorite author? I said him. They ended up tagging him in the article. He reached out. I give you that backstory because a few years later, I invited him to watch my husband race. And so we're sitting there together on the pit box and I'm telling him a little bit about our fertility story and how I've always wanted to write. And I'm sure, as a big famous author, he always gets all these people that are like, oh, I can be a writer like you. And so we're sitting on the pit box and he goes, well, why didn't you just write a book? Instead of just talking about it, do it. I was like, what? I'm not you. I can't write a book. And I'm sure, in my head, authors go away to these secluded cabins and they write and all this. And he goes, I've got so many kids. My wife works full time. He goes, I would write in the back of Ubers, on napkins, like you name it. And I would put my stories together. He was like, you don't have to have some fancy setup. You don't have to be, this. Basically, I didn't have to be him. And he was like, just do it. And so I did it. And I wrote our story, our fertility journey, right after we had our son, before we started trying for another one. And so at that point, it was, okay, we had tried for a while on our own. It didn't happen. We went to a fertility clinic, went through IVF. We're very blessed. First time, first try, had our son Brexton. And because of that, we started a foundation to help other couples pay for treatments. It was kind of, it was a difficult journey, but kind of also a fairy tale story. And so submitted it. Everybody said no, 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 no.
Did they tell you why?
It's just, these stories, there's not that many people going through it. It's not going to resonate. They don't sell. Well, totally God's plan, because right after that, we started trying for our second one. And then we had a miscarriage. And then we had a failed cycle. And we had a failed surrogate cycle. And then we did egg retrieval again. And then I had another miscarriage. And so what I learned from that is no is sometimes God's way of being like, not yet. Because had somebody have bought my book and published it before we went through the trauma of a miscarriage and a failed cycle and trying to figure out the whole world of using a GC, I don't think it would have resonated with as many women or helped as many women feel validated and heard in their own emotions. So, when it did sell, it was like, wow, it wasn't a no. It was just, there's more to your story. And not funny because it's been an awful, awful 6-7 months, but I feel like I could write an entire another book from what we've been through. And it's like, no matter how many years you've gone through infertility, we're almost at a decade now. You always learn something new. So this last round, I had a blighted ovum and I was like, a what? And they're like, you're growing a sac with no baby. I'm like, how is this humanly possible? How did somebody who's so immersed in all things infertility, not even know that this was a possibility? And so I speak out about what happens because I want other women to at least not feel so blindsided like I did so many times. So yeah, sorry, I continue to ramble, but no, that's how I got to my moment.
Oh my goodness. I have so many notes here that I want to just double click into. So thank you for sharing. I personally want to thank you. And also on behalf of my Renegade community and listeners, thank you for sharing your journey, not only for the sake of people feeling less alone and being able to relate that there's more than just you going through it, but also thank you for sharing it. In my mind, goes to business because you will be driving innovation through the awareness of your story because you're humanizing this. And the only way I believe we'll see progress is if we push innovation, which means dollars, it means stories, like real tangible, not just data, like adding a story to the data, right? So it's, I don't know, I appreciate your energy that you're giving this, especially during a time when you are in it. So thank you.
Thank you. You know, it's crazy you say that. So this last round, I'll give listeners a little bit of background. We made embryos. The first time I went through IVF was 7+ years ago at this point. Obviously, I had a miscarriage, a failed cycle. When our surrogate failed, I went to go get more doctors' opinions. And they said, you know, we believe, since technically we're called a proven uterus when you have a baby, fun term. Since I'm a proven uterus, as was our gestational carrier, they said, we think that the problem is potentially the embryos at this point. So we would like you to try that again. So we did. And I give you that background to then say we went, did our transfer. I took that at-home pregnancy test, was so excited. It said pregnant, you know, waltzed into the clinic the next morning, like, yes, take my blood, confirm it. They called and they're like, we don't want to upset you. You are pregnant, but your numbers are really low. Come back in 48 hours. So I go back in 48 hours and they said, unfortunately, your numbers haven't doubled, but they went up tiny bit. Please come again in 48 hours. Another 48 hours goes by, get checked again. They said, well, unfortunately, it went up a tiny bit, still not 50%. We're guessing this is going to be an ectopic pregnancy, but please come back again. Go to the fourth one. They call and they're like, wow, your numbers have more than doubled. We're not sure what's happening. Again, come back in 48 hours. Okay. Mind you, I did 7 of these tests every 48 hours. So then my numbers kept going sky high. And they're like, wow, so it might be delayed implantation. And so why I tell you this for research is I'm sharing this with everyone on social. And this lady reached out who's kind of like a researcher in the infertility space. And she said, since you've talked about your delayed implantation, I can see what doctors like search and research. And she was like, there's a huge spike in delayed implantation searches. Like, I want to tell you, I think you speaking out has other people looking into it, because a lot of people had said, you know, after the 3rd or 4th time, their doctors were like, you could stop your meds, where my doctors were like, no, we're not stopping until we know for sure. Like, we're going to go for ultrasounds. I mean, I went through so many tests and it ended up being, we were pregnant and then our embryos split and then we lost them both. Whole big story. But the point is, as you said, talking about it is what inspires more people to research it, more people to talk about it. It gets it on their radar. And I think by having these important conversations, then, you know, decades down the line, people aren't going to be sitting here like us wondering, what's a blighted ovum? What's an ectopic pregnancy? What causes this? What could I have done different? There's going to be more answers.
That right there, the spike in search among medical professionals based on what you're saying is, oh man, that just, it's wonderful. And it's also shocking that that's where we are, but you know what? We are. So again, it validates the impact that you're having by sharing and the need for innovation, you know, because these are pros that have been through years and years and decades of training. And here you have a PhD at this point. I mean, an honorary. And I would just say, you know, there's so many dynamics going on, Samantha. So you have the lack of understanding, the unexplained nature. And then you have the economics of this, which IVF is in large part a cash business, right? So it's an interesting dynamic in terms of the success rate. And I've just recently become more and more aware of this because I've invested in a company that's actually, you know, applying AI to IVF to try and solve some of this. And one of the things that I think about is like where the funding goes, right? So as I mentioned, as before we hopped on, my son was a micro preemie born at 27 weeks, 2 pounds, spent 3 months in the NICU. And as I was talking to the neonatologist, and there were days where it was touch and go. And it was just, it's hard to even remember. I was in such a fog. But I was talking to Dr. Barry and I was like, how come this is unexplainable? It's 2000 was 2019 at the time. We can do a lot of things. What's the deal here? And he said, there's not a lot of research around it. And where does research come from? Money. And so we started talking about this. And fortunately, the Kennedy family had a really unfortunate experience and situation, and with their journey, that they donated a lot of money toward one thing called surfactant that ended up being discovered was this thing called surfactant that really saved my son's life. But there hasn't been that was decades ago, right? So with you and looking at where you are and you're in it, I imagine you're having some pretty difficult conversations with doctors and having to challenge, because how can you trust what anyone's saying at this point?
It's definitely difficult. When I made the jump to a new clinic, it wasn't at all because I didn't trust the doctors at the first clinic. It's just that I've now been to multiple doctors, and I'm talking everything from, how do I put it? Like straight IVF top doctors to the whole other side of holistic doctors and acupuncturists, and just doing everything I can. Because I find what a lot of women in this community do is there's so many different things out there, right? There's so many tips, tricks, ideas. So you don't know what's going to work. So you throw everything at it and hope that one thing sticks. So for example, they've tested me every which way, right? Blood draws galore, checking my tubes, checking the blood flow to my uterus. I even did like this thing where I had to pee in a gallon jug like all day long, and they tested everything in my pee. Like they're like, on paper, you are perfect. You are perfect. There is no reason why you shouldn't carry. Your embryos are right now. We had 5 of them before we had 3. They're the highest grade you could give an embryo. Like we have no idea. Even when we had a GC, which is gestational carrier, they were like, her uterus is amazing. Like, look at this lining. Look at this. So nobody knows what's going on. And it's so frustrating. And now, even as we were talking about before we got on the call, with this hormonal crash I can't really get out of after the miscarriage, so many women just spend all this time on the internet, and everything says, do this. And then you read another article and says, absolutely don't do that. And it's so frustrating. And to your point, if there was more funding and more research, I feel like women would have a little bit more of a clear-cut answer to some of these questions. Like, to your point, it's 2021. What do you mean you can't figure out what's wrong? Like unexplained infertility, which is 1/3 of couples that go through infertility, in my mind, is the hardest infertility to face. When they told my husband and I, okay, you have PCOS, you have male factor, it was like, okay, well, that makes sense. I'm not making mature eggs. His sperm quality it's low count, not great quality. That makes sense. But then now, this many years later, almost a decade later, so it's 10 years of research almost, still getting tested. Now it's your body's good, or your GC's body's good. Your embryos are great. We still can't explain what's wrong. It's just not happening. And then they just tell you, well, IVF is kind of a little bit better than 50-50, but that's all we can say. Which on the flip side, when you're like, we've spent thousands upon thousands of dollars just for almost a flip of a coin. When you think about it, it's really hard. And that's why we started our foundation. We're almost at the $1 million mark of grants. And it's like great that we've been able to do that. But on a side note, why isn't infertility covered? It's classified as a disease. Why isn't insurance helping? Yeah. I mean, when you think about it, insurance covers Viagra, but we can't cover your infertility meds. Sorry. We can't cover your treatment. I don't understand it.
Yeah. And again, I think there's a lack of understand of knowledge, and I hope people listening right now are like, wait, what? If that's news, that's good, because now, supply and demand, obviously a lot of consumers and patients have a lot of power. We really do. But I think there's a lot of education still to be done, unfortunately. And when social media becomes a suggestion box, let's admit that we have some work to do. Let's go back to something you said at the very beginning. You said, so the author that you were hosting at Kyle's race said, well, instead of talking about it, why don't you just do it? I just love that. And do you remember the first time you either got your laptop out or pen and paper or like where you were? Because I feel like that is the moment we get momentum. Like that small step is the biggest win.
I do. So as I had mentioned, I had journaled. So in 2013, 2014, when we started going through our infertility, Instagram wasn't really a thing. Podcasts weren't really a thing. I didn't feel like I had anyone to talk to. All of my friends at the time were having kids, very easy. And so it became really isolating. So I started journaling just as a form of therapy. And so I took out all those things that I had written. And I was like, okay, I guess I should start here. And I kind of started, highlighting things I thought were important. And then I built kind of not like the full book, obviously, but something that I could submit to a publisher. And then when it got turned down so many times, I was like, you know what? This didn't totally feel like me. I was trying to write something based on, I had, at that time already now been pregnant. I had read The Girlfriend's Guide to Pregnancy. And I was in my head was like, I'm going to try to write it as like a guide, a help thing. And then I had talked with Harlan and I had talked with a few other people and they're like, well, you love reading murder mystery. Like you love like Lifetime movies. They're like, why don't you just write it how you would want to read it? And so that's kind of how it started after that. And I just was able to write in a way that truly expressed who I was. And I just felt there were some days, for me, the best was I'd be driving in the car by myself and I would turn on the record thing on my phone and just talk. And just talk. And then take that, dump it all on my computer and be like, all right, what's useful here? So that was good. A while after I had the miscarriage, I knew I had to get all those details down before I forgot it. That was probably the hardest. I remember sitting in our bathroom on the floor and just typing for hours and crying. And it was just reliving every single moment. And I remember I closed my laptop and I didn't look at that section for like 3 more months. So I was like, I can't be in that space again. So there was a lot of different writing styles. And then, it's like a puzzle piece, just piecing it together. And sometimes it was fun. Sometimes it was really hard. Like when publishers would send back, hey, this is great, but we're going to have to find somewhere to cut out 10,000 words. And you're like, I don't want to. Like, I need all these words. Like, well, I can't write a 900-page book. So let's cut out some words. So, there was sometimes that it was really fun. And then there was sometimes like as deadlines approaching, I'm not like a very work under pressure person. And so then I would get real panicked, but it all turned out, it all worked.
Well, it's such a real story, right? And as an author, I can definitely echo that writing a book is not for the faint of heart, right? We have that vision of in the cabin and let's just go away. And like your kind of writing mentor said, you can be writing in the back of an Uber, wherever you can get it done. And then that deadline is real, right? That editor or that publisher is like, no, I'm serious. We're not publishing this unless. So I'm sure there are more, but I love what you said about, the pass that you got in terms of we're not, you weren't able to sell it the first time around and how you took that no as a not yet. And on our team here at my company, we have we have different software that we use for tracking leads and stuff. And if we get a no, it's not an NO, it's an NRN, and not right now. And so we never, even asking Oprah to come on the show, I didn't get a no. I actually did get a not right now, but that is not a closed door, right? So thank you for sharing that. It's a not yet.
Yeah. And sometimes, it's just having to be more persistent about things, or sometimes it's for the best, because like I said, had a publisher bought the first version of the book that I wrote, I would have missed so much, and now knowing everything that we've gone through, I'm like, do I want to write another book, or what do I want to do with that? Because I will tell you what, this past 7 months have been a story all in of itself.
We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. Hi, everyone. If you are digging this podcast, please do us a favor and subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. It just takes a moment and it means a ton to us. let's talk about, I've seen your Instagram videos and, you're sharing, and it's such an interesting place because you're in it, but you're also able to share from a point of view of value. And sometimes vulnerability isn't valuable. We need to heal, process, collect our lessons, and then be able to share. And a lot of times, I see it's kind of like a scar. Glennon Doyle has been on the show and she explained it this way. She's like, if you have a wound and you're still bleeding, and sometimes sharing that is not the most valuable time, but if you can let it scar over a little bit or just even scab over. And I'm sure you have this delta between when things are happening and when you're processing and sharing, but it's probably pretty quick, I would imagine.
That's one thing that I feel, I don't know how to explain it. I always tell people, sometimes I'll share a lot and I'll share a lot in the moment. And then sometimes I'm not ready. And so I don't post anything for a while. And a lot of people are always like, well, I get so confused because in one picture on Instagram, you're happy and smiling. And then the next you're talking about infertility, like your emotions must be going up and down. And I'm like, well, yeah, sometimes they are. Like you're able to still appreciate and be happy in certain moments. And then in certain moments, kind of the weight of infertility kind of takes over. And I will say this last time, it really showed me social media is great. I feel like it has brought me so close with so many women and helped me through my journey. But then also I've been working with therapists and boundaries. And so I've always told people, when I'm ready to share, I will. Because there was a big gap when we were going through stuff and people were sending me almost nasty messages of how dare you not tell us after you've given us this much.
They were entitled or something.
Yes. And I tell people, other women I talk to, okay, it might be not be on social media that you're experiencing it, but it might be a coworker, a friend, a family member. And the same as I set up boundaries and told them hey, look, I'll share when I'm ready, or I'll share as far into the story as I want to. I try to help a lot of women do that in their own circles, because I do think, and that's one thing I've learned in all this, boundaries are so important. And there's going to be some days, and this is why I tell people, there's been a lot of people have reached out, what can I do for my daughter? What can I do for my friend? And I said, there's going to be some days they're going to want to sit with you and cry and tell you every last thing. And there's going to be some days they're going to look you in the eye and say, please don't mention one thing about a baby, infertility, anything. We need to go have fun. And I was like, just understanding those boundaries as, being able to set them. And then on the flip side, for others, being able to accept them is so important. And it's helped me tremendously. I was always afraid I was going to hurt people's feelings by being I don't want to talk about it, or please don't touch me. After the miscarriage, when a friend wants to come up and hug you, for a while there, I was like, please don't touch me. I know it sounds really weird because I'm Italian and I'm a big hugger, but I was like, I just feel so raw. I can't handle it right now. And instead of my friends being like, well, that's weird, they're like, well, thank you for explaining that, and I think that's so important for anybody out there going through, whether it's infertility or something else. It's just having those honest and direct conversations about your boundaries.
That's so, so important. And I think what you said too about, are you going up and down or having happy moments and sad moments back to back? That's life, people, right? That's not even, that's people who aren't going through this. It's just, it's amplified exponentially, I imagine, when you're doing A, publicly, B, there's, drugs involved. And I didn't realize this, but there are thousands of drugs evidently that it's a cocktail, right? It's trying to figure out what makes sense for each woman. And maybe I'm not, don't quote me on that. I don't know if there's thousands, but there's a lot, right? And so the path of that in itself. So you're wearing this patient hat, and then also this Inspector Gadget scientist hat who has their 10,000 hours in this topic. It's a fascinating time, and it takes leadership, I think, too, because one of the things that I've noticed in starting to learn more about this space, even from a business standpoint, is fertility clinics and doctors. Doctors usually have a pretty strong set of confidence, right? They've been around the block. They went through a lot of training. You can't be, you need a pretty strong stance if you're going to be able to even get through what it takes to become where they are. However, do you have any insight on having healthy tension conversations where, you're talking to someone who's probably pretty strong-willed or has a pretty strong stance. And you also, of course, do, because look at what you're fighting for. And you just aren't seeing either eye to eye or feel like you're a team. I just imagine the conversations that are going on trying to figure this out with the egos involved and lack of understanding, but also empathy. I'm not saying every, physician doesn't have empathy. You have to be in this space. So it's just that, and from a personal dynamic standpoint, has got to be its own challenge.
For sure. So I would say I've been pretty blessed to always have doctors. I almost look at it, I don't know how to put this the right way, but if you're going to start fertility treatments, you're almost interviewing your doctors, because for the next unforeseen future, like they're like another member of your family. Like you're spending a lot of time with these people, and not only the doctors, but the nurses and the clinic. So if there's a red flag right away, you need to do your homework. You need to find somewhere you're comfortable. But what I always tell people is you need to go in and write all your questions down, because you're going to be flustered. You're going to be overwhelmed. They're going to be throwing so much information at you that you're even more overwhelmed. And this is where in the book I detail, I got this wrong in the beginning. So to go even farther back, when we were first trying, I had like a nurse practitioner at a local clinic, and I was like, hey, we're going to try. So a few months go by, nothing's happening. I'm type A, I'm very impatient. So I'm like, look, what's going on? Is there anything I could do? What should I try? And she's like, no, it hasn't been a year. I'm like, okay, but like I'm 26 or 27. I'm pretty young, No, it's got to wait a year. It's got to wait a year. And so then I'm breaking out. My hair is falling out. My periods are like literally all over the place. I'm peeing on all these ovulation sticks, but I'm always ovulating. So I'm like, what the hell am I doing wrong? None of this is making any sense. And so I'm trying to talk to them, and they're just kind of like, no, you're fine. Just give it a year. So finally, at it almost a year mark, I go in, and this is after I was like, I don't know if I'm having a miscarriage, like something's wrong. Like I need to come see you now. And so I go in, and they do a quick blood draw and the ultrasound, and they're like, oh, you have PCOS. Well, what the hell is that? I have no idea what you're saying. And she's like, oh, well, basically it means that, you have all these immature follicles. You're not making mature egg. We're just going to put you on Clomid. It'll stimulate it. You'll be good. So we do that 4 or 5 cycles. Now I'm just like certifiably crazy, because Clomid is, yes, it helps a lot of women get pregnant. Also makes you crazy. Okay. So good and bad. So then they're basically like, oh yeah, well, there's really nothing else we can do. You're just gonna have to go to a fertility clinic. And I remember sitting down at the fertility clinic, and they're like, can you give us your husband's paperwork? Like, where's yours? Because I brought all my medical stuff. And we're like, well, why do you need his? I have the problem. And I will never forget, the doctor was like, please tell me you did not go on that many cycles of Clomid and nobody's checked him out. And I was like, well, why? He's young. That other clinic didn't say to check him. And I remember it was literally almost like he wanted to just like smack his palm on his forehead. Like, oh, he's like, I can't believe nobody checked him out. So they check out my husband, and they're like, well, he's got male factor. Like, there's no way, even if we do timed IUIs with medicine, like he hardly has any sperm. Like, this is not great for having kids. And so it was after that point, sorry for that long-winded story, that I was like, that's it. I'm never going to be that la patient, take everything that they say. And so I always, from now on, go in with a list of questions. I go in and, ask if I don't understand something the first time. I don't leave and go home. I'm like, no, can we stop right here? Can you re-explain this to me? And I had a girl in the fertility community tell me once, she was like, not to sound harsh, but you're paying thousands of dollars. Okay. Essentially, they're working for you because you're the one paying all this money. She was like, if you don't understand something, it is not out of your rights to say, hey, pause. I know you're busy, but I really need you to explain this to me one more time. She was like, you have every right as a patient to get your answers. And if they blow you off, that's not your clinic. And I've been very fortunate. We've been at 2 clinics now, great staff, great doctors, willing to sit there, willing to answer questions, take calls, past hours, right? Like all the good things that you want from your clinic. But I spoke with so many women over the years that were like, they gave me the wrong medicines. They didn't, listen. I was just a number. They rushed me out so quick. Like either A, you have to find a new clinic, or B, you have to be assertive. And I'm not like a very assertive person naturally, so it's hard, but this is your future. This is your health. Like this is the time. You don't have to be rude about it, but you could just say like, excuse me, I just need 5 more minutes of your time to really understand this before I leave. Like there's nothing wrong with doing that.
So this is such good advice, regardless of any medical situation. This is so gold. I remember in the NICU, they would often ask me as the mom, what is your intuition telling you? What does your mother's intuition tell you? And at first, they're family, right? The doctors and nurses, they're now my son's aunties. And we're that close. We spent 3 months together. But I remember at first kind of doing a tilt head and thinking, wait a minute, you're the expert here. You tell me, don't rely on my intuition. Like this is, we've got some high stakes here. And what I realized after enough of those times and having discussions with them, of course they know what they're doing and they have that expertise, but they have maybe a list of 10 things they could do first in a really intense situation. And if they can decide priority wise, let's try this one first based on what a mother, like my intuition was saying, they have enough experience in that. Usually the odds are that go with that first, right? So like this isn't just a big hypothetical test, but I imagine you're being asked that at times too, where it's like, okay, you have the most data because you've been the one character in this plot that hasn't changed, right? In terms of you've been in every single scene. And we were at a teaching hospital, and I mean, those doctors and nurses rotate and you have different people. And then, and so as a patient, it's so smart to be empowered and not only ask the questions, but contribute, and so.
I totally agree. I mean, that even happened today. So long story short, trying to get my hormones balanced. And so I'm like a pretty holistic person too. Like I like acupuncture and all my supplements, and I was trying to do it very naturally. It just wasn't working. And so I had done a podcast with a doctor, and I reached out to her the other day, and I was like, I've spoke with a number of doctors, a number of midwives, a number of nutritionists, holistic people. Everybody's giving me different answers. And she goes, okay, you've been on everything from just this or all the way to the highest meds. When did you feel the best? And I was like, well, I was on this low dose birth control, but like everybody on, you're not supposed to be on synthetic hormones, and I don't want to do it. And she was like, okay, but again, when did you feel the best? And I was like, on the low dose birth control. And she goes, okay, because you have PCOS, your body doesn't make hormones right. She goes, so why don't you just go back onto what you feel best on? And she goes, why are you trying to, I was trying to do all the quote unquote right things and be natural. And I love it. And I take all the advice of the nutritionists out there that are like for the diets. I take all the advice of the natural supplements to add in too. And she's like, but you might need those hormones as well. Like it's okay. And I think that's one thing that a lot of women now are like, it doesn't sound so dumb, but I know there's going to be a listener out there who feels me on this. Everybody tells you can't wear real deodorant, right? Because real deodorant's now bad for you. So all of us are out here using natural deodorant, and I stink. It is 105 degrees in North Carolina. I just smell. And finally this girl was like, why don't you just wear natural deodorant for a month or two? It'll be okay. Or regular deodorant for a month or two. It'll be okay. She's like, and sometimes I think you have to give yourself that grace. I think we all want to be perfect. We all want to be these organic and healthy and this. And even if our bodies are like not responding to something. And so it's hard for me because I love all these natural supplements. They make me feel so much better than when I'm not on them. Sometimes I'm like, listening to this doctor, and she's like, yourself. It's okay. Maybe it'll help you level out. She was like, but you're miserable and your hair is falling out in chunks. Like you have to do something.
I love that she said that to you. And we feel we need those permission slips because they're the pros. And We have a friend of mine her name is Dr. Meredith Provost. She's a fertility doctor, a top doctor. She's been on the show. And one of the things she always talks about is just education and things we can be doing potentially to prevent and or just learn more before we get to certain points where she sees it all, right? And she just talks about how she'll have people come to her, but it's almost like too late. If she was able to talk to them a year ago or 3 years ago, they wouldn't have needed to come because they could have been looking at certain factors and stuff. Anyway, it's interesting how then all of a sudden it's the deodorant. It's like, really? You really think it's the deodorant? Like,
I'm like looking down at my arms, going like, it's hot in North Carolina and it's sticky. And I've tried every natural brand. It's not working.
And that's where we are yeah. It's fascinating. I would be remiss to not bring up the incredible life you're living with your husband and this thing called NASCAR. And my dad would kick my butt if I didn't mention this. He's a huge Kyle fan, always has been. I mean, we're talking.
Thank you.
Absolutely. We got to actually see you. I took him. It was daddy-daughter date in Austin, Texas a couple months ago. And it's kind of in my first, in one of my previous lives in working in sports and entertainment, I got to go to the Daytona 500 and do some fun things. So I got a spotlight into that world. And just, what's one thing that you feel like most people don't know about NASCAR, or what it's like to be the spouse of a driver, or just anything? What comes to mind? Anything popping in?
You know, I think for a lot of people, it is a sport and it's entertaining to watch. But like as the spouse, it's also, I mean, obviously very scary, right? Like NASCAR and the teams have made huge innovations in the safety, but it's still, they're going 200 miles an hour next to other cars. It gets very stressful in that aspect. And then another thing that's really cool is I think NASCAR is a sport that allows a lot more access from like fans to the drivers, or, you know, even like Brexton and I would go out, Toyota has this area and do Q&As and things like that. And so it's really been over the years getting to meet a lot of fans that have inspired a lot of things. So for example, I own an online store. Well, that started from these women being like, I love your clothes. Like, you should just have your own store so we don't have to like search for all this stuff. Or the blog, or really, I mean, back in 2014, in I think it was December, I had a blog before it was like cool to have a blog, I think. And we shared our story of infertility, and all these people, because this was only Twitter at the time, Instagram, I don't think was a thing, or it was just starting to be a thing, reached out and they were like, me too, me too, me too. Like, I've been through this. And same thing with a miscarriage. And it was really them that, and their support from literally complete strangers, that makes it okay for me to feel like I can go on Instagram crying with no makeup on and like tell people exactly how I feel or what's going on. And to your point, we do that. And I think some people are like, oh, you do it for sympathy. I'm like, no, it's because I know that somewhere in this country, there's another lady sitting on her bathroom floor, holding a failed pregnancy test, feeling alone, feeling scared, feeling like, why? I'm a woman. I'm supposed to carry a baby. What is wrong? And when I was going through this, I had to go through a DNC 2 days before Mother's Day. And I like reached out to these support groups and went through it with another lady, you know, like just to have somebody, it's like, hey, how are you feeling? Hey, is this happening to you? Or even the day that we transplanted, another infertility group was like, shout out to these 3 women in our community going through the transfer day. And so this girl, Jenna, and I connected, and it was like, didn't know her, didn't know anything about her. All right, what time are you getting implanted? Okay, I'm here. All right, we're waiting. And then for days afterwards, it was, are you feeling cramping? Do you feel this? How do your boobs feel? Like just a friend, you know? And I think what's amazing about this infertility community is like, there's no bullshit, right? You don't have to, you cut through all the fake stuff that I think you go through, right? You always want to be like your best self when you're meeting people for the first time. But in the infertility community, it's like, let me show you my worst self, and like, you're still going to love me for it. And that's what I think is so amazing.
I love that. I think that's the power of digital connectivity too, and the positive. As humans, we decide is it good or bad, right? The technology is not bad or good. it's the humans behind it. And same thing. I got a direct message. It's been 2 years now since my son was in the NICU, but I shared quite a bit. And there were days where I shared right away, and the days that I took time to process and whatever. People are along in the journey. And this woman, she was sitting in the NICU holding her 1.5 pounder and saying, "Hey, I never thought I'd be in your shoes when I was following, but I just want to let you know what you shared, and that strength and just willingness to let us in on it has really helped me where I'm sitting right now." And there are people from Hong Kong that are, I mean, all over the globe that are, I'm sure, people are reaching out to you. So
and vice versa too. Like I had to make a decision so my body would not naturally miscarry the two, well, at that time, then 2 blighted ovums this last time. And so they were like, you could either take these pills, this is like the percent chance, or you can have a DNC. And so I went on to the Peanut app and I typed in that exact stuff. And I found these 2 women, literally messaged them. And within an hour, they both responded and they were like, here was my story. Here's my opinion. Here's this, here's my opinion. And then like followed back up after to be like, hey, you okay? And that's the power of this community, right? I was sitting here doing all this online research of percentages and didn't have the human side, and then jump onto these support groups and instantly have women that are like, here's exactly what I went through. Here's what you can expect. And so I think that's just so powerful because it just helps. I guess it just helps take away that unknown factor.
Yeah. And no one else can provide that support or relatability other than people going through it at the time. Correct. Right? It's like, I didn't want to talk to, I had my best friend in the NICU that I met, and we're still this tight, and our boys will be best friends someday, I'm sure, at least friends. But it's just like, there is no one else that could possibly even understand other than, right. And I just have to say, as we're kind of wrapping up, I really appreciate that Kyle has joined you and you're a united front, because that male presence in this conversation is often missed. It's not there. And in order to push and drive innovation, which I'm seeing happen behind the scenes, so I'm so excited about this and really just optimistic. But that male presence has to be here for this, not only just in general. So congrats to you guys for being a united front on this, and him showing up and using that influence for both of you to shine a light and push forward and do what you can do.
I'm so proud of Kyle. I mean, I know guys aren't necessarily going to get into the depths of it like a woman is, and I understand that. But I think, especially in the job that Kyle holds, I like, obviously God's plan, right? Like an athlete who is this tough. I mean, his nickname's literally Rowdy, right? And he's okay coming out and saying like, yeah, I have male factor. There's nothing I did to, well, I don't know if you can say there's nothing I did to cause it, because they always say stay out of heat, but like, you can't stay out of heat. But just him being okay with me talking about it. I've had so many women reach out that were, because, they're like, my husband didn't want to get tested. He was for sure it wasn't him. And because you've talked about Kyle got tested and we found out that it was male factor along with what you had, they're like, it inspired my husband to be like, okay, well, if it can happen to him, it can happen to me. I should get it checked out. And I just love that, because it is, I mean, 1/3 of the time it's male factor. It's important to talk about. And I just love that he's willing to talk about it.
Absolutely. I have written down here, strong ass woman. Just underline. And I, as I listen to you, and here you are, traveling around the country on any given Sunday, your husband's out there driving 200 miles an hour. You're going through what you're going. You just must be extremely strong and have a foundation to be able to navigate the stresses of what you're dealing with. So,
well, thank you. I mean, I definitely feel like over time I've learned better coping mechanisms, just ways to get out my frustrations, like in a healthier way, like maybe when I was going through infertility the first time, it was to isolate myself. I didn't want to talk. And now I know, okay, I might not want to talk to my friends or family about it at certain points, but there's therapists, there's support groups, whatever that looks like. And I feel like that's just been really helpful because it is a hard journey. And then obviously having Kyle, who is just the greatest support. I mean, I will never forget, I looked at him and I was like, hey, I just feel like even though I love our clinic here in North Carolina, if I just want to know we've exhausted all options. I found a clinic, surprise, it's like in Colorado across the country. And he was like, all right, when are we going? Not like, can you find somewhere closer? He's like, why did you go there? And I was like, well, I had a friend of a friend of a friend who, there's this doctor, he's got great success rates. They're, clinics are just supposed to be amazing. Let's just try something different. He's like, okay, let's go, or just different things like that. So I think that he helps to keep pushing forward a lot. As does, I think, just a lot of these friendships that I've made, as you said, with the mom in the NICU. Like, I feel at times like I love my friends here. Obviously, they're my greatest friends. But as I said, I think just those bonds of people going through exactly the same stuff you're going through are what make social media so amazing.
Yeah, I agree. If we were to bring this all the way back around to where we started and I'm going to refer to him as like your writing mentor. Right before that conversation, you'd been considering sitting down and writing. If you were to say something to yourself at that point, knowing what you know now, what would you have said?
I know exactly what I had said because I thought this the other day, that you're stronger and more capable than you think you are. I sat down one day and somebody had asked me like everything we've been through by the years. And so I started writing it down. And when I looked at it on paper, just the failed cycles, the medications, the rounds, I never thought back in 2013, 14, starting this journey, that this is what our journey would look like. And I remember, I will never forget, when we had the option to do genetic testing, I asked the doctor, well, why should we do genetic testing on our embryos? He said, it helps decrease your chance of a miscarriage because so many miscarriages are 1 in 4 and quote unquote, in his terms, like common because it has to do with the embryo genetic makeup. So many women think, oh, it's because I did this or this or this. And he's like, it's not. It's the makeup of the embryo that it didn't have everything it needed to make it to full term. And I was like, okay, well, then we have to do genetic testing because, and I remember saying this, I will not be able to mentally or physically ever handle a miscarriage. Like I would just fall apart. I do feel like now going through them, yes, I did fall apart, but I was able to put the pieces back together. And so when you look at that, or I told myself years ago, like I would never be able to have a surrogate. I hardly trust people to watch my kid to babysit, like let alone let my child grow. And I could never do that. And now I have. And so it's like you realize a decade later, like I am strong, I am capable, and it's going to be really hard and ugly and terrible times. And you're going to get through it. And then you're going to get through it and be stronger. And I think that's what a lot of people in this community, even when they feel really low, I always tell them, like, you're so much stronger than you think you are. Just look at what you've already endured. Look at how you keep pushing forward. Like that shows strength.
Amazing. Well, I mean, what a note to wrap up on. Thank you for sharing. I encourage you, continue. There's so many beneficiaries of what you're doing. It's incredible. And for sharing your time and wisdom today with us as well.
Well, I really hope it helps somebody. I mean, I know there's a lot of people out there that are going through infertility, and, I hope that this was helpful in some way or another.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to the show. Hit me up on social media to let me know what you think. I'm at Amy Jo Martin on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And I want to hear your Why Not Now moments so I can share them on the show. Just send me a note to whynotnow@amyjomartin.com. For show notes and other offers, you can visit amyjomartin.com/whynotnow. And while you're there, don't forget to sign up for my email newsletter for exclusive content and announcements. A big thanks to Rock Salt Music for all of the tunes by the talented John Coggins. And of course, a hat tip to Richard Brewer for editing and producing the show. I'll see you next time, and until then, why not now?